and it's fed by 5 major rivers and over 20 different streams. It's about 119 miles long, 50 miles wide at its widest point. The average depth is about 107 meters. Now, the lake shore is actually currently receding. It's at its lowest point that it has been in about 50 years. So the water level keeps on going down. It has been receding for a number of years now. I thought mostly that has to do with sort of lower rainfall levels, so that it's not fed from as many of the rivers surrounding it. Now, the lake also has cultural significance, and this is one of the reasons that I think Lake Titicaca, I mean, besides for the sort of natural splendor of it, its location in the world, it's the home of the Uros. Now, the Uros sort of live on this group of 40 artificial islands that they've just made from these reeds. Right? Has anybody here been to Lake Titicaca? Have you seen these islands? It's pretty impressive that they're made from these reeds floating. They're sort of constantly working on these islands that they live on. Most of the huts, most of the structures on these islands are also made out of these reeds. And you see, you go visit the islands and you're walking on these reed beds and they're constantly sort of weaving their islands. And originally it was sort of constructed as a form of defense. So it was to escape persecution both from the Spanish as they came in as well as from other tribes within the area. But just that you have this group that has created their own islands that they're living on, I find fascinating. Now, the second choice of mine here is Patagonia. Now, I've had a lot of questions. I probably should have clarified this earlier on in our cruise here, but I've had a lot of questions about the difference between Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego. Right? What exactly is the difference between them? Tierra del Fuego is basically that island at the southern tip of South America there. Patagonia is more of a sort of eco-zone. It does include part of Tierra del Fuego within that habitat type, within that biome, but it's not as easily of a defined area. You can't exactly put exact boundaries on Patagonia. Now, it does include parts of both Chile and Argentina. It goes all the way down to the coast in Chile, so the fjords that we were going through are considered by most to be sort of part of that Patagonian environment. Now, in general, it's classified particularly on the eastern side, on the Argentinian side, by these sort of step-like plains that go up. So you have a rise of about 100 feet, and then this flat plain, and then another rise, and then another plain that works you sort of all the way up into the high mountains of the Andes here. And you have a lot of different ponds sort of within those plates. They're both freshwater and brackish water. Typically, you get this sort of bare vegetation that you see here. You don't get a lot of large trees, but you do have a lot of rainfall, which really makes the area extremely lush. You have fairly diverse sort of flora and fauna within the region. So you have a lot of interesting plants and animals that call this area home and that you really can't find anywhere else, that really are just endemic to this area. Now, you also, of course, have the absolutely massive glaciers. We saw a number of glaciers as we were cruising through Glacier Alley there, as well as the Amalia Glacier, that sort of come down out of Patagonia. And it is the largest ice sheet in the southern hemisphere outside of Antarctica. That's up in the top of the Patagonian highlands there. So it really is an amazing sort of wonder worldwide, not just within South America. Huge significance. Now, Iguazu Falls. I mean, it's just spectacular. That's why I chose it. That's all. I don't have anything else to say about it. Now, Iguazu Falls is located right on the border between Brazil and Argentina, and it flows from the, surprisingly enough, Iguazu River. That originates sort of in Brazil, and most of the river does flow through Brazil. Now, the original name for Iguazu Falls in the local language actually translates as big water, and that's exactly what it is. It's a huge, huge amount of water. The total falls, it's about 275 sort of separate falls covering about 2.7 kilometers or 1.7 miles of river. Now, how many of you guys have been to Victoria Falls over in Zambia, Zimbabwe? Okay, a couple of you. Technically, Victoria Falls is considered larger because it's one continuous sheet of water that's falling. I personally think that Iguazu is a bit more impressive.
Yeah.
I just like it a lot more. Now, the story, the local sort of traditional story behind Iguazu Falls is that one of the gods of the region planned on marrying this mortal woman. Apparently the woman wasn't so interested, so she ran away with her lover in a canoe, and the god, sort of extremely upset in this rage, decided to cut them off. So sort of smashed this big hole and created the falls, and then he sort of condemned the couple to this eternal fall over the waterfall here. But it is absolutely stunning. If you didn't make it on this trip, I highly recommend getting there at some point because it's absolutely spectacular. And the Galapagos, you can't talk about natural wonders of South America without mentioning the Galapagos. Now, it's not part of the mainland, obviously. It's an archipelago. It's located about 972 kilometers, 605 miles or so west of Ecuador. So it's a fair ways out in the ocean, and it does straddle the equator there. Now the spread sort of from north to south is about 220 kilometers. So it's a fairly large archipelago covering a large area with all these different islands. There's actually about 15 major islands that make up the Galapagos, and then 3 smaller islands, and then about 107 sort of rocks or islets that sort of stick up out of the water there as well. Now, I'll be talking a little bit about geology this afternoon, but the Galapagos really form an integral part of the geology of South America as well. So they're part of the Nazca Plate, which is the tectonic plate located just to the west of South America here. It's moving east-southeast and sort of being forced under the South American plate at a rate of around 2.5 inches per year. So it's moving, I mean, fairly quickly when you consider the size of the Earth and the sort of geological time scale. Now, this makes the Earth's crust underneath it start to melt from the friction and the release of water there, and causes massive volcanoes. And that's how the Galapagos Islands were formed. The oldest island is thought to be around 5 to 10 million years old. Isabella, sort of on the far left-hand side, and Fernandina. So these islands here, Isabella and Fernandina, they are actually the youngest. So the youngest islands are on the west. The oldest islands are going to be on the east side of the archipelago, and they really are still being formed. There was a massive volcano back in 2007, I believe, 2008, on Isabella that, it really did sort of extend the amount of land on the island. So they are still being formed, they are still growing and changing, and it's often considered to be one of the most biologically unique areas in the world. I don't know that I would quite agree with the veracity of that. It does have a lot of very interesting biology there, but there are some other extremely unique and definitely more biodiverse regions on the planet. But it is definitely one of the world's most well-known sort of areas. I mean, of course, famous for Charles Darwin and his voyage on the HMS Beagle, looking at the finches and looking at the different species that have adapted to different seed sizes on the different islands there. But it's an excellent place to visit. It gives you a chance to really sort of get up close and personal with some of these animals. And the blue-footed boobies, the waved albatross, the iguanas, and they're all just sort of right there, and you can just sort of walk around with them right next to you. So it really is an amazing place. And of course, Cape Horn. I'm assuming that you guys all know where Cape Horn is at this point. Know a little bit about Cape Horn. It is the southernmost point